Pause that for a second. Welcome everyone to this Modern Sales Pros DE&I event, Parents in the Revenue Community. Today we're sitting with an amazing group of panelists to talk about what it's like to be parents as sales leaders in the revenue community, how to advocate for yourself in the workplace, and other amazing advice. The Modern Sales Pros Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, or DE&I Committee, is working really hard to bring you content and events around a particular DE&I topic every single month. And if you don't know what Modern Sales Pros is, we are the world's largest community of revenue leaders. We help leaders answer questions they might otherwise struggle to answer on their own. And if you see this recording and you think, I want to be a part of this awesome community, we have it so you can apply on our website. And you'll be able to see more great content that's possible through the sponsorship of many of our amazing sponsors like these folks and the folks at Chorus and SalesLoft who are sponsoring this DE&I event and many others throughout the year. So thank you to these orgs for helping us achieve our goals of being a more inclusive community. Before we dive in, some light housekeeping notes. This is a pre-recorded session, but if you have questions for the DE&I committee, for our wonderful panelists, or just want to see more about what we're doing, that information is all going to be available on our DE&I landing page. Now let's dive in. This awesome group of folks is going to give us all the insights on parents in the revenue community, and Nicole Taylor has graciously offered to be our moderator for this panel. So Nicole, I'll pass it to you to introduce yourself and get us started.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here today amongst this awesome panel. I'm Nicole Taylor. I'm a parent of a 20-year-old, but when she was little, I was out in sales, traveling out and about and things like that. So this particular topic of conversation is very interesting to me as I've been having conversations with other parents in the revenue world. By day, I work as a BDR enablement manager for UKG, Ultimate Kronos Group, and I'm also on the committee for the DE&I forum with Modern Sales Pros. So I am so excited today to introduce this panel and to also be a part of this conversation. But I want to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves. So I'm going to start off with Kate.
Great. Thank you, Nicole. I am Kate Smalkin. I am the head of talent and employer partnerships at Climb Higher, which is a new kind of workforce development organization focused on training overlooked and hidden talent for upwardly mobile careers in tech. And I would say on top of that, primarily and apropos of this conversation, I am the mom of 4 young boys spanning an age from 7-year-old twins to a 12-year-old. I have always worked in sales or revenue driving function, and I've only ever worked in tech as a parent. So this is a very relevant and real topic for me, and I am so excited to be here.
All right, thank you, Kate. And we also have Allison with us today. Can you introduce yourself, Allison?
Hi, thank you. I'm excited to be here. I'm Allison. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Parentally. We partner with companies to improve the parental leave experience. Before I started this business, I was actually leading enterprise sales at a tech startup that was acquired by WeWork. So I'm sort of playing with 2 hats here. One, I think about parents and parenting support on a daily basis in my current job. And then previously had my first child while I was working in sales as a sales manager. And after I left, I also have another child, so a 1-year-old. So excited to chat about all of this today.
Awesome. Thank you, Allison. And last but not least, Scott, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Scott Logan, lead marketing at Chronologic. Chronologic turns time into value by automating the workplace calendar and focus solely on revenue teams, which I myself have only been a part of the revenue cycle from SDR to rep to marketing operations and leading demand gen teams and now entire marketing orgs. And I have a 13-year-old boy and a 5-year-old boy. So definitely have had my fair share of children next to me during a meeting and, having to travel along with that. So hope to share some insight here.
Awesome. Thank you, Scott. Well, as you can see, go over the agenda a bit. So we're going to have a panel discussion. It's going to take about 25 minutes. We're going to talk about experiences of parents in the revenue community, especially our own experiences, and then also what advice we have for an inclusive culture and some pro tips. So as you can see, this panel of pros that I have here are definitely more than happy to help with that conversation. And then we'll have some group discussion with some pre-gathered questions that we have today. So hopefully that sounds okay to everyone. So first, we want to talk about, what the experiences are that you face as parents in the revenue community in the workplace. We know that's a little different than just being in the workplace because of all the different hats you might wear as well. So who would like to share with me what experience they faced? Kate, I know we had some conversations about this a little bit.
Yeah, I was actually gonna, at Climb Higher, we have an expression called voluntold, where if you don't volunteer, then someone gets voluntold. And I just think, Allison and Scott, you had such great, kind of general framing points that I want to kick it over to one of you first.
Sure, I can jump in. I think, so I had my first child when I was a sales manager. And as I think about what are the unique challenges that I dealt with, starting, having my first child while I was in sales, I think there are a few things. One, I think parental leave is actually very specifically challenging in the sales world, just by nature of the fact that our space is so pay for performance. And so for a lot of companies that are comfortable paying someone their full salary when they go out on leave, for some reason in the sales org, and this is universal, this is across almost every company I've ever spoken to, in the sales world, there's a lot of discomfort around, excuse me, what happens? How do you pay commission when someone goes on leave? And how do you cover their work? Because everyone is very focused on their own opportunities and their own leads and their own contacts. And so I think the parental leave experience is exceptionally difficult within the sales world. And then I think outside of the parental leave space, once I came back from parental leave and kind of got my feet underneath me, there were really two main challenges that I experienced that I think are a little bit more unique to the revenue world. One is that I worked at a startup where by nature of that is we don't really know how to set goals, and we don't really know how much work goes into achieve the milestones that we need. And that's sort of even more difficult when you're in sales at a startup. And so I think that's one major challenge that I struggled with is if the goals aren't exactly realistic, I have so many more constraints now that I have children and I have other responsibilities and I'm not willing to work around the clock anymore. And especially in sales, that becomes very difficult when it's not just that you have to work more, but also your pay is tied to that. And then the third piece is, I think just by nature of what sales is there is less flexibility in some ways. So if I have a full day of meetings scheduled and I lose childcare, that's really different than if I'm a product manager and have internal meetings that I just, that's still difficult, but it's more difficult when you're sort of dealing with outside prospects or clients. I will say, I do think that there are those major challenges, but I also think that the revenue world can be amazing for parents. And so we don't need to dive into the amazing piece, but I just wanted to flag that, if there are certain structures, management support culture is in line with supporting parents, I do think that this is a great profession because at the end of the day, the best salespeople are the ones that bring in the most revenue and the best clients. And so it's not necessarily linked to the actual activities, it's about the impact. And so anytime that a parent can find a role that they're really good at where they can achieve their goals with less work, I think that's a great career to be in. And so I think that there are a lot of really great parts about being in revenue as a parent, but then there are unique challenges as well.
Yeah. I've had children at home and working from home because I've been working remotely for most of my career. And so with my wife at work, if there's no daycare that day because of their clothes or whatever, the kid's at home and I have internal and external meetings both all day long. So that's always a challenge to find a way to balance it. And I'm having to try to structure my day to say, okay, I'm going to block this section out because this is right before nap time and this is lunch. Like if I get them full and tired out, then they'll crash for 2 hours. And I'm going to have my most important meetings between like 1 and 3 because I know the kid's out for the count for a couple hours, I hope. And there's a little bit of stuff that you can do on the inside there to kind of set yourself up for success, as my wife would say. But then at the same time, it's different in different environments based on the culture of the workplace. If it's folks who are at a company that's more mature, it's been around for a while, there's all sorts of age groups in there. It's much easier to have, at least until the pandemic where everyone was kind of thrown into this work at home world, to have a flexible where people understand. But if you're at a startup, a lot of young people, maybe not everyone has children, and it's a very aggressive environment, as you said, Allison. I've found that it can be difficult because there's just isn't that understanding that, hey, my working hours may be a chunk of not online for 3 hours, but I'm also working 5 hours into 1 in the morning to make sure that, you know, my numbers are on point at the end of the quarter. And as long as your numbers are on point, most of the time, everyone's pretty cool with it. And just, you know, you got to find a way to not kill yourself in the process.
For sure. I totally agree with that. I know I can speak to one of the challenges that I had as well. With that being said, was, you know, being a young woman in sales, like trying to figure out, did I want to even start a family? Right? Did I want to do something like this? Or looking at, you know, the issue of, okay, am I going to work late? Am I going to work whatever hours? Am I going to do whatever it takes? There's a lot of experience that goes around that, but also a lot of guilt that goes around that too, with parents in general, not being able to spend that time. So that scheduling and that time management and having the support at work to do that is so important, because I talk to people all the time that are kind of like, I don't even know if I want to start a family because I don't know if I can sustain that in revenue world, especially in technology sales. And I'm like, yeah, of course you can. You'll have support, but every manager is not the same and every situation is not the same. So, you know, too, I think one of the bullet points on here is like, how does it differ by location or job position, you know, et cetera. In the revenue world, we have like BDRs, like I train BDRs, right? They support sales, right? So they have to be able to, you know, focus on the leads as soon as they come in, do this, do that. So how are you juggling being a parent 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, especially in the pandemic, you know, versus just not having that role or responsibility at all? I think is a lot of guilt or questions that people have in their minds. Kate, did you want to add anything, or do you want to move on?
Yeah, totally. I would love to yes and everything that was just said. And I think, Nicole, that's a perfect segue, because what it speaks to is this mentality that I think we've been steeped in for a really long time, right? Which is like the lean in, have it all in order to progress in our careers. And I think that comes with a particular set of challenges for sales, right? All of this after hours, like we've all had the experience where you're in your car on the way to a meeting, you know, a big high stakes meeting, and then you get a call that like somebody has a fever at school or at camp and you have to turn around and go pick them up, right? And that's really tricky. And so I think, you know, what's happening is that we're starting to ask ourselves as parents in revenue, like, is having it all really the goal that we want to set for ourselves? Like, is that realistic? First of all, is it toxic? Is that something that we even want to do? Is that a noble goal at all? And I think 2020 has been like a big wake up call for folks all across the board. Like, no, we have seen that we can build relationships virtually. So let's see how we can take this and run with it in order to make kind of a more inclusive and flexible workforce for everyone, right? And I'll say also, like, for those of us, I'll put myself in this bucket, who are fortunate enough to have the infrastructure, the childcare to like make that early morning meeting or the Friday evening happy hour, grab a coffee to build that relationship. We can really balance those competing priorities in a way that other people can't, right? I focus on early career, non-traditional talent, right? Like folks who are coming from working at Starbucks or the Amazon warehouse or like cashiers at Burlington Coat Factory, where sales is oftentimes a really great path for them. But at the same token, they're starting out. And in seniority, I think comes more responsibility, but also some more flexibility, right? Like we are able to kind of call the shots and say, all right, like, my team can handle this and I can go pick up my kid. That may not be the case for somebody who's starting out and really trying to prove themselves in revenue, right? And so I think we need to ask ourselves the question, like, how do we foster inclusivity? How do we take into consideration single parents, folks with kids with individualized needs, all of these extra considerations that may cause people to drop out of revenue, or we don't want them to, because we want to keep and develop all this big talent. So I think those are the big, questions that I'm asking myself and asking sales in general, as we move forward into this like post-lean-in world, if you want to call it that.
Yes, for sure. Such good points. It's like, you have to really think about all of those things and what role we play, where we are, all of this, just to be a parent or to think about how to drive our everyday lives. So. All right, I think we're going to move on from this question. So, Kate, you're just talking about creating an inclusive culture, an inclusive environment. So what is your advice on how to navigate the revenue world as a parent? I think we kind of talked about this a bit, but from an inclusive standpoint, like what's important there?
I can pick that one back up and kick it off this time if you want. So I find that, personally for myself, navigating the revenue world, it's about setting concrete boundaries, right? Like I was having a conversation with my husband a couple of weeks ago, freaking out about something, I'm sure, a client or a deadline. And he was like, okay, I want you to stop and ask yourself, like, has there ever been a true sales or recruiting emergency, like where somebody's life is at stake? And I said, no. Like first I, gave him side eye, and then I said, no, you're right. Like I have to agree with you. There has not been. And so I think what I've done is intentionally set the tone with my clients, right? Like we may freak out and think about how they're perceiving us, but it's probably not going to raise an eyebrow for them either way if they get that email at 8 a.m. the next morning versus 6:30 p.m. this evening when we could be unplugging with our family, having dinner, relaxing, right? So I think those are things that help me, and I encourage everybody to set those boundaries, because then you spread it, right? Our clients may ask themselves, all right, well, maybe I should be a little bit more intentional about setting my boundaries too. So I think that'll help us kind of get into that, paradigm shift.
Yeah, on that note of like setting the tone. So for instance, my CRO actually has in his calendar that he shares with all the internal folks, when and how to overlap or meet on meetings, has daycare drop off or pick up from camp, things like that in there. And so now the other parents on the team don't feel guilty for taking those same breaks and even labeling it as such, because then oh, they're going to be busy, and maybe they don't know that the kid's going to be in the back seat talking nonstop and you can't take a call, but they at least know that it's not an available time. So those are some things I think as a manager I've seen work really well to create that supportive culture here.
I also, I was thinking about, so I wrote this piece right after I had my first child about how becoming a mother made me better at my job. And a coworker of mine who did not have children came up to me and she said, I had this epiphany while I was reading this that I wish that I had that constraint, because she said, basically, I described this experience of I worked 24/7 before I had a child because I could, because what was I giving up? I was giving up, free time, which wasn't necessarily as critical to me, I guess, at that stage in my life. But then once I had a child, I was no longer willing to give up that time with my child. And it was an interesting conversation that I had with her, because it was basically this idea that having those constraints is actually good. And so it's hard to fake those constraints. So for people who don't have children and may not feel like they need to maintain those boundaries, it's really hard for them to achieve more of a balance. But for those of us who have children, if we are able to make that decision, and if we're in an environment that can allow us to do that, being able to be super explicit, literally saying, I'm not going to work after this time in the day, it makes it almost easier, because so much of overwork is in your head. And it's a mindset, and it's, work is never done. There's always more things to do. And so I think like being able to set those boundaries and feeling good, because it means you're saying yes to your kids and no to work, is it's difficult, but I think it becomes easier when you have that constraint of your children is the reason you're doing that. I think also from the manager's perspective, being able to celebrate efficiency and being able to celebrate when people are shutting down is really important, particularly in a startup or fast moving environment. I know when I was at my last company, there was a period in our earliest days where leadership was really celebrating, like, this person worked all weekend to get this thing done, and they were celebrating the thing that they didn't actually want to celebrate. And once we realized that, we stopped doing it and we started celebrating instead that this person achieved this huge milestone and they did it by only working X to Y time, or they did it in a way that is the way that we want to encourage everyone to work. So I think all managers being thoughtful about what are you celebrating and highlighting, hey, this person actually figured out how to identify earlier in the sales cycle that this was going nowhere, so they didn't waste their time. And how can we as a team do that more so that we're not going down the wrong paths? So I think sort of thinking about setting that culture and really highlighting that that is the expectation, that we don't want to be an overwork culture, because I think when you're a parent, the most important thing is simply that you can work between, daycare drop off and pickup, and that you don't have to have that bleed over into after hours.
Yeah.
I think that goes a lot into like efficiency and effectiveness, right? Like, how are we going to figure out what we need to do within the time that we have, rather than just overworking ourselves and doing this, especially with your child being what you're saying yes to. I love how you put that. Like, saying yes to my child and saying no to something else. I used to feel guilty about, not going to a happy hour or not doing this because I wanted to sit down and have dinner with my family, and that's okay. And you're absolutely right. Like, managers should understand and know how to celebrate that instead of, celebrating the overworking. Because I'm definitely the send an email at midnight kind of person. So I don't want to do that anymore. Right?
Yeah. And to the point of, we may have an advantage to a certain extent as sales and revenue and marketing people, to the point of when you're home, you can be home if you travel a lot, whenever we start to travel a lot again. Because I found that there were many jobs where for years, multiple years in a row, I would have to be gone every single week, which made it very difficult for my wife and made it very difficult for my children. And so I needed to make sure that when I was home, that computer didn't open. So what I did was I made sure that instead of what I would normally be doing at home and playing with the kids and doing whatever at the hotel room and on the plane commutes and in the terminal, I just do all the busy work and all the projects I was going to get to normally in like an after hour setting, and I can do that then, so that when I do get home, I'm already caught up. So what I found out after traveling every week for the last maybe 5 years, I found that when am I having time to do the busy work? Because once 4 o'clock hits, the kids want to play, and then I'm exhausted by the end of the day, and I don't have time to do the busy work. So that's been a struggle too, to try and say, okay, what's this new life going to be like, and how do you restructure it in order to get all the things done that your regular routine, maybe you found a way to do it. So finding a new balance and just completely changing the way you do things, you have to be open to that.
I love that, new balance. We always talk about work and life balance, but what is like normalcy look like, right? And how can it be something new that you decide to do, for the benefit of yourself as a parent and for your children as well. Awesome. So how do you advocate for yourself though, right? So I hear a lot of the conversation that we're having right now, like you guys have the opportunity to be able to say, okay, like I'm gonna pick my kid up from camp. My manager understands this, like I'm scheduling this out, whatever. What if you have a manager that might not understand that, or you don't feel like you're in an environment where that's okay? What is your advice for how someone can advocate for themselves in order to get that done? Anyone can answer, sorry.
I can hop in here. So we have a lot of these conversations. The main thing that we sell to employers is we have coaching programs. So as parents are coming back after they go on parental leave, there's a lot of struggle with work-life balance and figuring out the new normal and whatnot. And what we talk a lot about in those coaching sessions is having an open conversation, because I think one of the biggest issues around parental leave is just no one really knows how to support a new parent going on leave and returning to work. And when you make assumptions, it can be a really, there are bad outcomes. And so as simple as this sounds, I think having a conversation with the manager, they may not understand what you're struggling with. They may not understand how much work is on your plate. And so I think it has to start from there of like explaining and sort of waving your, white flag and saying, I need help here. And this is what would be helpful to me is really important. But I do think it is a fair point that, at least for me, as I was in a management position, and so it's much easier to just snap my fingers and say, I'm going to do this now, and I'm going to model this behavior for my team. And everyone sort of loved it, right? Because I was the manager. I think it is more difficult if you're not at that management level, or if you don't have as much freedom as I did. And so I think it can be a really tough thing to do. And I think sometimes it's a little dangerous to put it on the person to solve the problem, because there may actually be a larger structural issue. So not sure I have great advice for how to advocate if there's a sort of bad culture or bad manager situation, but I think it has to start with having that open conversation to even assess what the problem is.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, that's great. And I'll just tack on, I think, for me, it's about empathy, right? Which is something that I think some organizations under index on. And at our organization at Climb Higher, one of our core values is that relationships matter, right? And I believe that building trusting relationships with your manager and your direct report, like, totally encompasses all of this, right? Understanding their context. What is it as a whole person that they're bringing to work that we really need to take into account, right? And so what I do in order to build trust with my direct reports is that I let them know by making the implicit explicit, which is, those are words that I live by, that I will be supportive. I will be supportive of those considerations. I always say to my team, if you like, the 9-to-5 workday butt in seat is outdated. We know that, right? Some people work differently. Some people, like, I'd rather my direct report go spend an hour picking up their kid and getting them lunch and then come home and be more productive after that than just feeling the pressure to have to, like, work all the way through their day, because that's kind of what's expected by convention, right? So I do this by checking in very often, not only just on obviously our goals and our metrics and what have you, but on the entire person. Like, how are you? How are you as a person? And how can I help support not only your professional development as a sales associate or, future sales leader, but also as a person for your personal growth. And so what I say is, like, I give my direct reports all of the rope in the world, keeping a really high bar, and all of that boils down to empathy and communication. And I think that's something that, like, we really need to infuse into our sales organizations across the board.
Yeah. And on that point, I think that it's important not to compare as much as possible. Like, my wife and I's lifestyle is much different than others because of the revenue job that I'm in. And people say to her, well, how do you even do that? He's gone all the time. And we have our own routine, and it's our normal. Whatever is normal is what works for you. That's the normal. So I would just strive to say, to advocate for yourself with your boss. Be like, you know what? My lifestyle and my family structure is different than maybe other people who are on the team or is yours. But let's come to a normal as far as how we work together, like our normal, not compared to anybody else. And if your normal between you and your boss can actually still get the job done, and efficiently and on time and all that, then that's how you set it. And I think that's an important thing to think about.
Absolutely. Such profound points. It's funny, you have conversations about this all the time, but then until we sit down and really talk about it and hash it out, it's like you don't think about it that way. I agree. Like, management definitely needs to have open communication, trust and transparency, like, is key, right? Your direct report needs to be able to feel comfortable to, we're saying, how are you advocating for yourself, but also as managers in the revenue world, we have to put it out there that it's okay to communicate with me about what's going on with you and your family, and you're not going to be, chastised for it. And things in a comparison will definitely kill you, Scott. I know I traveled every week or every month when my daughter was younger, and I used to feel like I wasn't a great mom, like everyone else who was going on to school trips and this and that. But my husband freelances, so he was able to do those things, right? And it was like, for a while, that comparison was like, oh, well, this set of parents is doing this, or this set of parents is doing that. You have to do what works for you, and what works best for you. And that is the great thing about being in a revenue organization, because you do, in some senses, most of the time, have that flexibility, and most importantly, hopefully, the empathy. Okay, let's move on. I'm sure we have a couple of other questions. Ooh, pro tips. So I think you guys have been giving pro tips like throughout this entire thing, right? But let's think about like how if you had to say one thing, right, that would encompass all of your pro tips. What is your pro tip? And I will, Scott, I think I heard you talking already, so are you gonna jump in?
Oh, sorry, I totally let you go, but I thought you were gonna pass it off. So I'll just give mine quickly. My pro tip I started using and figured it out during the pandemic is when I have to watch my 5-year-old, I will block off time for playtime within there. And then when I give a countdown of 20 more minutes or one more TV show is his like version of time, that's when we get to play. And I'll play with him for 30 or 45 minutes and block those chunks out so that they get their fix of being with you. And then, you can move on and be more productive afterwards.
Absolutely. Kate, what's your pro tip?
So I would say, avoid falling into the trap of trying to be, the perfect parent and the perfect sales leader, right? That does not exist. Like, don't let perfection be the enemy of the good. If you have to give your kid the iPad and get them French fries, do it. Don't feel bad about that. To do what you need to do. I think everyone I'm sure everyone on this call has done that at some point. And that's okay, right? Some days you're going to be like 50% at your job and 50% parenting. And that's fine, because what matters is that you're really trying and that you're really advocating for yourself and that you know that your intentions are good, right? And if you have that all in place, then the rest will just be cake.
For sure. Allison, you have your pro tip to add?
Sure. I think in thinking back to the past year when we lost childcare and we were trying to manage parenting and working, I think the thing that helped me the most was figuring out what time of the day I am most productive and most creative, and then making sure that in that period, I protect that. So my husband and I had a very explicit schedule where I'm much better in the morning. So if I need to do anything that's high value, deep thinking, I need to do that first thing in the morning, or as early as possible in a larger chunk of time. And so we structured our schedule that way. And that has carried over into today where our kids are now in childcare. But I still make sure that I have a 2 to 3 hour period in the earlier part of the day that I can get the most important work done, because then I can spend the rest of the day checking off things on my to-do list. And I end the day feeling successful and I feel good at the end of the day. And I'm able to then sort of shut down and spend time with my kids and focus on them. And so I think, there's some research though that shows that for some people, that creative period is actually in the end of the day. So it's not just, the recommendation is not just block off time in the morning. I think it's think critically about when you want to have quality work and then create structures and systems around that so that you can get that work done. And it will just help you so much more in terms of being able to then disconnect and focus on your kids.
Absolutely. And I'm hearing a constant thing here is like time, right? I was saying as well, I used to schedule in things to do with my daughter. She didn't know about the schedule, but I scheduled it in. And also, hey, guess what? If things didn't work out that way, like, don't give yourself some grace. Like, don't be so hard on yourself. Everyone has the ability to say like what they're doing wrong as a parent, but sometimes, hey, especially in this past year, like, what are you doing that's right? And everyone can't be perfect with everything, but yeah, time is of the essence for sure. Thank you all. All right, so I think we're going to go to some questions from our community now. And we have a couple of questions. I would say this one's pretty interesting. Like, what advice can you give to managers who are not parents to manage parents?
So I think what's interesting about that is sometimes the assumption is that managers who aren't parents we assume that they will not be as good managing. And I think what has been interesting for me to see is actually it depends. Sometimes managers who don't have kids approach the experience with a really open mind. They're very curious. They actually go the extra mile to ask questions of their direct reports who are parents to understand what they can do to be supportive. Whereas sometimes managers who have children sort of take their personal experiences and put that on everyone else. So, oh, well, I was able to do this, so this should be fine for you. And let me tell you how you can do it. And so I think with managers that are not parents, the number one piece of advice is to be curious and to talk to the parents on your team and understand what they need, and know that not every parent will have the same, mentality or thought process of what they want to do. Some parents, I love how Scott talks about his travel. That is a common theme, that managers will assume that parents do not want to travel. That's just not true. A lot of parents love travel. They love to have a little break from their kids and stay in a hotel and, eat restaurant or order in and things like that. So I think the number one thing is don't make assumptions and talk to your parents about what you can do to be more supportive of their work.
Absolutely.
This isn't a pro tip or anything, but just an interesting story where I had a child and my older manager did not have a child. And it was never really an issue because we just figured it out at home on getting work done. And then he did have a child, and he came to me in a one-on-one, and our one-on-one was, how did you get your work done? And he was asking me advice on things. So I think even with the folks who are trying to understand a little bit, it is a bit eye-opening. So yeah, exposing some of that to them early on is probably helpful.
It's so funny how the tables turn there, right? So I'm going to ask you guys one more question, one fun question from our community, and then we'll wrap up for the day. That went by really quick. Geez, the time flies when you're having fun. But our fun question is, what's your favorite activity to do with your kids or family? So Kate, do you want to share that?
Sure. So I was an athlete growing up. I guess I could still consider myself an athlete, just kind of an older, creakier one. And so watching my kids find their love and their passion for sports, and like having the privilege of being able to drive them to practices and like watch them, develop that love. For me, that is like my ultimate supreme parenting joy.
Awesome. How about you, Scott?
Yeah, for us, my boss calls our family the weekend warrior family, because every weekend we go on hikes in the mountains, because we live in the foothills in Salt Lake. And so we have several canyons to our disposal. And every weekend we go and try a different hike and go to a different lake or waterfall or whatever. And that's probably one of our favorite times.
It sounds like fun. And Allison?
I think we're still in that stage. My kids are 4 and 1, where they're still discovering things. And so everything is fun to them. And so, for example, right now, going to the zoo is like the most amazing thing and mind blowing to them. And so I just like doing anything where you're reminded that there is crazy stuff all around us that, we think it's normal to see a monkey, but it's just mind blowing to them. And so I love doing anything like that where they're just odd.
I love it. I think I have a mix of all you guys. I'm here in New York City, and my daughter's an artist, and my husband is, he does a lot of Spartan race, like obstacle course racing and things like that, and has a group. So our weekends can range from just exploring, like it could range from hikes or, long walks, discovering new things, to going to a museum in the city. We act like tourists, even though we're in New York, and we'll just have a day of it and, go to a nice restaurant or explore a new neighborhood. So I think that kids always have fun with that. We've been doing that with her since she was about 4 or 5. So that's been a long-standing fun tradition that we have here. Awesome. So I'm going to call Taylor back and see if she can wrap us up for today. Thank you so much, panel. I've had such a great time talking to you guys today.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. I learned a lot. I'm not personally a parent, but I'm looking up to all of you. I think this was wonderful. So Nicole, thank you for moderating. Scott, Allison, Kate, you were phenomenal. I learned so much. I loved hearing your fun facts about the things that you do with your kids. That was amazing. Thank you again to Stills, Laughter, and Chorus. I hope everyone has a wonderful day. Hope you have a good pickup if you're picking up your kids. And we will see you next time. Bye.
Bye, everyone.